I just got in my most anticipated comic book collection of the year and wanted to unbox it for you guys. So stay tuned and watch this video until the end. And we're back. My name is Taylor. This is Taylor Talks Comics. And I cannot wait to open this book and show it off to you guys. I actually sat in this very chair with very different backdrop when I did it, and announced that this book was coming out. Could not believe that we are getting this collection, these comics in this format. So first of all, thank you Organic Price Books for sending me this review copy. Try and do this without getting peanuts everywhere. You have to be very careful. Did I do it? Some peanuts got somewhere. But that's okay, because I got this book. Check this out. This is the Taschen Weird Science EC collection. So they come in this beautiful box that mimics the book inside and keeps the book safe. You saw Organic Price Books even puts it inside of another box to keep it really well protected. And here it is. Look at this thing. This is absolutely gorgeous. Look at that spine. You get the Weird Science title lettering. It's going to look amazing on the shelf. You get that cool little alien guy on the spine there. Look at that. And the back is another cover of another issue. This is absolutely brilliant. So EC Comics, if you're my channel, you know how much I love EC Comics. If you're not a long-time viewer, or this is your first time, please subscribe. I'm on the road to 5,000 subscribers. It's my goal to hit it by the end of the year, and I need your help. Give the video a thumbs up, comment down below, share this video with all your friends, share it on Reddit, share it on Facebook, all those places. I'd really appreciate that. But long-time viewers know how much I love EC Comics. Here are the in papers. And I collect the EC Comics in the Fantagraphics black and white reprints of the EC Artist Collection. It's my preferred format. There's fold-out paper here. And the reason for that was because the Dark Horse reprints EC Comics too, but they've modernized the colors, and I don't really love that. By all means, if it doesn't bother you, then read it that way. These are some of the greatest comic books of all time. You should read it in any format that you want. Or just read them in general. But here's a piece of original art too. I'm going to flip this under the microscope, don't worry. And get a closer look at this, but just wanted to do the unboxing and flip through. But these are going to be true to the original colors. Because what Taschen does is that they reprint these. Oh man, this is beautiful. I'll even get the color guides. Yeah, I'm definitely going to flip this under the microscope in a little bit, don't worry. But they do true to facsimile editions of these issues. So you get like this glossy cover for the first issue of Weird Science, which is actually number 12. I'll explain that in a little bit. And then you get this newsprint type paper that Taschen actually created the formula for, the recipe for this paper. And it gives you like a thick matte paper, but it mimics newsprint, but it won't yellow and age over time. But these colors are just absolutely brilliant. Look at these. This is the first time we'll ever get these original colors in oversized format to be able to really truly appreciate the artwork in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to sit down and read this book and enjoy it. But don't worry, I won't make you watch that. I'll travel into the future. And when I flip this under the microscope, I'll have read this and we'll go over bit by bit for the each page. But like I said earlier, watch this video until the end. You want to check out this book in closer detail and figure out why you need to purchase this book. So let's travel into the future. All right, now it's time to put this book under the microscope. I'm so freaking excited. So I'd have been reading this I love these comics so much. It's such a different experience to read them in color. So let's just dive right in. So if you're not familiar with the Taschen books, I do have a playlist on my channel showing off all the Taschen books I have so far. One showing off the history of the EC Comics book, same trim size as this, and all the Marvel books they've released so far. I have all those as well. It's become my favorite format in comics. I think this is the best way to reprint classic comics. So, up first, we have the cover to the first issue of Weird Science, which was number 12. I'll explain that in a second, with an L. Feldstein cover. And then on the spine, we have a cool little alien guy at the top, which does mimic the Marvel books as well. So this looks great on shelf if you have the Marvel ones, because the Marvel Taschen books all have a character on the spine right there. So it's EC Comics. The great Weird Science lettering. I do like that they use the later lettering in the series rather than the original lettering. Original lettering's cool, but the way they put the lettering on the science is my favorite. So I'm glad they used that on the spine. Covers the years 1950 through 1952, and then we get the Taschen logo at the bottom. On the back, we have issue number 11 of Weird Science, which is the last issue collected in here. Again, I'll explain why issue 11 comes after issue 12 in just a moment. So it's exactly the same thing as the Marvel ones, where you get a cover on both front and back. Open up, and you get really cool end papers here with this high contrast, saturated, I guess it's like a magenta color. Again, they do the same thing with the Marvel books as well, having these blown up panels done in two colors. And then we get the classic EC Comics logo. And then it even has a fold-out page here too, which I can't really get into frame too good. But this is from the Harvey Kurtzman story in the first issue. And you'll see here the table of contents. So we've got introduction by Grant Geisman. It says Weird Science is issue number 1 through 11. Now, the issue numbers on the comics are different. It does just collect the first 11 issues of the run. Again, I'll explain the numbering here in a minute, I promise. And then the history. So you can see the introduction by Grant Geisman is pages 14 through 50. And then we get to the comics. And then the history pages are the last 10 or so pages where they go over some stuff I'll show you. Get a page of original art here. And this is a L. Feldstein piece. I don't own any of the full-size artist editions of EC Comics, which I really do want to own. So it's cool to see these pages this big. I love this. This is cropped from the cover, which I think, yeah, this is a Feldstein piece as well. And it's cropped from the cover, so it's like the lower 2/3 of the cover up there says Weird Science. I'll show you that in a little bit. But I love these blown up panels, and seeing it in this format, seeing it this large is so cool. And that's the same alien character you see on the spine of the book. And here's the introduction by Grant Geisman. Now, Grant Geisman, which I guess I didn't realize until I read this book, I read his biography at the end, that he's a musician. He wrote the intro song for 2.5 Men, which is really cool. Also has his own solo music he does. But he wrote the history of EC Comics, the book from Taschen. So obviously he's a historian of EC Comics. And his introduction here is really fantastic. It explains the entire history of how the sci-fi comics came to be at EC Comics. If you weren't aware, I have so many videos on my channel showing off EC Comics. I have a whole playlist of those as well, if you're wanting to dive into that. EC Comics was a publishing company. Their heyday and what they're most famous for was the era in the 50s, where they had sci-fi comics, crime comics, horror comics, and war comics by Kurtzman. He was the one that did those. And then they eventually went on to make Mad Magazine. That's probably what they're most famous for as well. So this is some of the stuff. This is showing some of the stuff that they did before that became their thing. Before the 4 genres is what they dabbled in. Here's a picture right here of Feldstein and William Gaines, the publisher of EC Comics, as well as Feldstein, who wrote a lot of stories for EC Comics. Maybe the most stories. I don't know. Here's a Johnny Craig cover showing off a horror comic piece. Now, we do know that the next edition of the Taschen books for EC Comics will be another sci-fi one. I believe it's weird fantasy. So we haven't dabbled into either the horror, the crime, or the war comics just yet. I would love for there to be a War Comics volume. I think that's what I'm most hoping for. I'm a big Harvey Kurtzman fan. Here's the original art piece of the cover that we see here. So it's good to see Al Feldstein's original art. And this, like I said, the cover is just, or this introduction is just amazing, just to read through all of the different aspects to this. You get some color guides throughout here as well, which is really, really fascinating. Like this one here, this color guide, you get to see it in this like really weird way that you don't really see original art, because you don't really see the color process for comics back then. But that is an important aspect of this book in itself, because this is the largest and, in my opinion, the best way that you'll ever read EC Comics with the original coloring. I want to get into the comics here. Oh, here's some more blown up images of the Kurtzman story, and then we get to the comics. So the comics of EC Comics have been reprinted a number of different ways, a number of different formats over the years. Currently, the most prominent ways that we have access to these reprints is through Dark Horse Comics and through Fantagraphics. Dark Horse Comics is reprinting them similar to this in the fact that they're collecting all just the issues straight through. So you can get a collection of Weird Science. It'll be like in the magazine-sized format, trade paperbacks that they're doing right now. And it'll have 5 issues in there for like $25. Really good price. The difference there is that those are being recolored with more modern sensibilities, much to the ire of a lot of EC fans and myself. I don't really like modern coloring. It doesn't make any sense to me, especially with these classic colors and classic line art. I want more of the flat, saturated colors that that they originally printed in. Now, the Fantagraphics collections are done by artists, and those are done in black and white, but you'll see you'll have like a collection of Wally Wood's sci-fi comics, or Harvey Kurtzman Ward comics, or Johnny Craig's crime comics, all in one volume. I have a lot of videos on my channel showing off those books. And that was my preferred way to collect EC Comics until this came out. Until Taschen announced this, I will still keep my Fantagraphics books. Those are going to be easy to put in my backpack and throw on the go and read those just that way. And I like seeing the line art in black and white. But this is a beautiful presentation. So if you're not familiar with the Taschen books, same thing as the Marvel ones. It comes with a high glossy cover. It collects everything inside the issues, true facsimile versions of these issues with advertisements and everything, letters, pages, everything's included. And then the interior pages are done with this thick matte paper that's supposed to emulate newsprint, which I think it does an amazing job of. I guess the recipe for this paper stock is a Taschen signature recipe that they do. And I love that it's also not on a stark white paper. I think that makes a huge difference when reprinting old comics, to not do that, because that can be like jarring to see the stark white band around it with the colors and everything on. So the way the colors sit on here is exactly the same, because that's the thing too, is when these comics were originally printed on this cheap newsprint paper, if you were to take that same exact file and try to print it on a high gloss white paper, those colors are not going to sit on there the same. So to print them on a paper like this is true to form. Now, these are all taken from really high quality scans of these original comics. So they have access to these. Sometimes, I know through the Marvel program, I don't know if it's the same with this. They'll get from CGC, they'll get high quality, not 9.8 issues, but, close to 9.8 issues, really good, whatever they can find, so they can crack open the slab and then scan them in and then blow them up. To reproduce them this way. So this is as if someone found the first 11 issues of Weird Science from EC Comics, put it into like a transmogrifier and blew it up to this 11 by 17 size, and then gave them to you in hand. Like I said, the high gloss covers, the newsprint pages on the interiors, just such a beautiful presentation for these stories. Now, to explain the issue numbering. So back then, in the 50s, there was like a fee that you had to pay the postal service, like $2,000, in order to renumber a magazine or a comic book. I don't know why. It's very silly. But that's the way it was. So a lot of these publishers, you'll notice, especially if you look at old issue numbering from back then, like Marvel did the same thing. Rather than change the issue number, they'll change the title. So I think it was Saddle Justice. Their Western comics was what issues number 1 through 11 are, right? Because it's number 12. And then starting for issue number 12, they had issue number 12 stay there, but they just called it Weird Science. Now, that only lasted for 5 issues, because by the time the Postal Service caught wind of what they were doing, they're like, hey, you still have to pay that fee. They went back to the numbering starting with number 5. So I guess the first 4 issues. So you'll see, when you look at the history of Weird Science, there'll be issues number 12, 13, 14, 15, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then it goes to issue number 5 all the way through, and you'll see another 12, 13, 14, 15 repeated. But those are totally different issues. So there'll be 2 Weird Science number 12, 2 Weird Science number 13, 2 Weird Science number 14. But they're totally different issues of different comics. That's confusing, I know. But the good thing is, none of that matters, because these are all one and done stories. If you're not familiar with EC Comics, usually each issue would have 3 to 4 stories in it that were like 7 to 8 page strips, all one and done stories. They never had like a continuation of a character from one issue to another. It was all brand new stuff, done in short little bits. I kind of compare it to like the Twilight Zone. So if you're familiar with Twilight Zone, like kind of an anthology type deal where they're all one and done stories, they don't carry over. So the actual issue numbering doesn't matter at all. It's just there for historians to explain to people that don't even really care, I guess. But this artwork is beautiful. These stories are great. Will Gaines and L. Feldstein constantly tried to advocate for their sci-fi comics. They were the lowest selling titles they had. Their crime and horror were always their top selling titles. But they would always put advertisements in saying, like, these are our best comics. They're the ones that they're most proud of. In particular, I think at a time, because sci-fi pulp stories were still pretty big, but not in comics. Science fiction really didn't bleed over into comics until the EC Comics really made it popular. So that's why these are really important stories in history as far as genre writing goes. So these are all magnificent stories. And now this was these stories all came out in the early 50s. So it's post World War II. So we're going to get a lot of these science fiction stories. You're going to get a lot of the space race happening, as you can see with the aliens on the cover here. So you'll see a lot of, because that was when the space race was happening between Russia and US, and who was going to land on the moon first. It took us, 19 more years to land on the moon after these comics came out. So you get a little bit of that in here. But you get a lot of the post-atomic bomb stuff as well. So this story right here, actually, how timely that I got to that. The destruction of Earth. So this scientist comes in and tries to talk to the Secretary of State. I will say, the Secretary of State shows up in a lot of these Feldstein stories and always looks the same. I don't know my U.S. history enough to know who the Secretary of State was at 1950. I don't know if this is modeled after somebody or if that was just like his go-to Secretary of State character, but it was cracking me up as I was reading through these. But I digress. The Secretary of State and the scientist are being confronted by this other scientist saying, if you drop this H-bomb test that you're planning on doing tomorrow, it's going to blow up the whole Earth. And they're like, yeah, this guy's crazy. He's lost his mind. And they said, not only is it going to start blowing up the whole Earth, but it's going to send the Earth all the way into the sun. And they're like, man, that guy's crazy. And they just like throw his evidence of this and his scientific, reports on this, throw them in the trash. And then look what happens. Exactly what the guy predicted. And then they'll have kind of a twist ending at the end. Here's a Harvey Kurtzman story. Kurtzman, he got his start with EC Comics doing their sci-fi stories. So he doesn't have a lot of sci-fi work in here, or in EC in general. I think he has a story in each of the first 7 or 8 issues of this book. So there's a lot of his sci-fi work is in this book. But as far as his overall catalog of what he did with EC, he started dabbling in the sci-fi and the horror stuff at the start. But then he went on to make the war comics and totally changed what people see and expect from war comics forever. I've talked about Kurtzman Wars comics a lot on my channel, so I'll try to refrain from doing that here. But you'll see a lot of early Kurtzman work, which is really fantastic. I love all the title lettering and splash pages too. It's such a full, complete package of a comic that I feel like that's kind of gone missing. Like this presentation of the splash page with the cool title lettering, it's such a thing that Marvel would then do as well. In the letters pages too, this is a perfect way to talk about this as well. So Stan Lee with Marvel, when he would go on in the Silver Age and kind of create the Marvel bullpen experience with the fans and create the letters pages and the things. All of that he kind of derived from what he saw with EC Comics. Kind of stole that gimmick from them. Because the Marvel bullpen really didn't exist in the way that he made it seem in the 70s or the 60s. Like you didn't walk into Marvel offices and see Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and John Buscema all like at their drawing boards, drawing their latest comic. It wasn't really like that at that time, but he made it seem like that, and he did a good job of it. It created a whole fandom around Marvel Comics, and I'm not hating on it. I'm just trying to tell the truth here. And then the letter pages as well, the way he would create this kind of correspondence with the fans and let them in on what was going on and make them feel like they're part of the project. That was also a thing that EC Comics did back then. So those things that we love about Marvel from the 60s really transpired from EC Comics in the 50s. But again, the title lettering, great splash page, all of this, I feel like, were things that they took from EC and put into Marvel Comics. Again, seeing all these old ads is always fun, too. Like, there's nothing... It's just such a nostalgic trip. So here's that one cropped image I showed you that was blown up earlier. Good Lord, these science fiction programs are certainly becoming ridiculous. Husband and wife watching the sci-fi TV show as an alien is invading their house, the same alien from the television show. Now here's another Feldstein piece. The one thing I did notice too, reading these, again, because most of my EC reading has been through the Fantagraphics collection, so I've not read a lot of EC comics in like their complete issue package or in historical, chronological aspects. But one thing I noticed while reading this for the first time, since it was one of my earlier experiences of doing this, was the famous artist signature that we noticed in a lot of EC comics didn't really start at the beginning, because the only artist that was really signing his name on his pieces in these early issues was Feldstein. Now, that wasn't, I don't know that was, like, here's a Kurtzman piece with this great splash page. You don't see a Kurtzman signature on here. Now, I don't think that was like a don't put your signature on there unless you're Al Feldstein thing. I think it wasn't common practice in comics back then. Because again, the whole aspect of like Stan Lee with Marvel Comics creating like Jack the King Kirby and Big John Buscema and your pal Sal Buscema, all that stuff was the fandom around the artist and the creators of comics was again started in EC. And the fans would start noticing the signature and start writing into the letters column saying like, oh, Feldstein's great at sci-fi, or I really love Kurtzman's war comics, or what have you. So I don't think that was like, it just wasn't common practice in comics prior to this in the 30s, 40s, and 50s to know who was doing these comics. It was almost like the company does it and the creators are second rate to that. That's also why we get to Carl Barks and the whole story of how nobody knew his name for the longest time, of the great duck artist doing the Donald Duck comics. But that's another story for another day. But I love these Feldstein pieces. And I guess, I don't know if it just dawned on me reading this, but there's such a common ground here between this and Basil Wolverton's sci-fi comics, with like the characters like staring into the camera with their panicked faces and things. And Basil Wolverton wouldn't go on to do EC work until it was Mad Magazine. It just makes me wonder if their paths never crossed, or Basil Wolverton, why he never did like EC sci-fi comics. I feel like he would have been ripe for the pickings there. Now, the Radioactive Child, I was going to say, this is another Kurtzman piece. Again, no Kurtzman signature, but I can just tell by the figure work. We're starting to get into the signature Kurtzman style. And his layouts, too, Kurtzman, because he'd write a lot of his own stories throughout here, and his layouts were always more interesting and kind of different, varied more so from the standard grid that all the other artists worked on with EC. Kurtzman's just truly one of the greatest comic book minds of all time. House and Time. So this is a time travel story. I created a Gargantua. So we get kind of like, I just love this. This is such like a King Kong kind of horror, like sci-fi story. I don't know. These are just so much fun to see. Just using great use of scale too, like with the giant and the buildings and things, and the hand coming out of the ocean with the giant ship in the background. Now here is I think this is the first cover that used that title lettering. I think is what I noticed. Because again, that's my favorite title lettering for Weird Science. Now I'm not able to find the next. Is it right here? Oh, here it is. No, that was the first one. Okay. I just love that kind of the electric look on the Word Science there. I did notice, too, this is another thing I noticed. The comic conforms to the Comics Code. So this was before Comics Code Authority came around through the Senate hearings and stuff that almost wiped out EC Comics with the exception of Mad Magazine. But I didn't realize they had a Comics Code before that. So that's one thing that I went at, because I fancy myself a comic historian of sorts, or at least a fan of comic history. So it made me go down the rabbit hole of figuring out what that was, which is interesting that I didn't know there was a prior Comics Code to the Comics Code Authority. Here's Wally Wood signing it for the first time, his name. And Wally Wood's sci-fi stuff is absolutely brilliant. I mean, one of the all-time great sci-fi comic book artists, maybe the all-time great sci-fi comic book artist. So you see his stuff in here. They just talk about this in the introduction, too, of Wally Wood and Harry Harrison's relationship and how they kind of swapped art duties, and people wouldn't really know who was the artist and which, who was the penciler, who was the inker, who drew what, until they separated and we got Wally Wood drawing his own stuff, and then people figured out how great Wally Wood is. This is another Kurtzman story. Now we're getting Jack Kamen signing his name. So now we're getting to the point where these artists are starting to sign their names, and then that's when the fandom starts to come about with people figuring out which of their favorite artists or things. And that's one thing, again, missing from my EC reading, because I read them in the Fantagraphics collections, which is all one artist. So this is Jack Kamen, and I'll read a whole collection of Jack Kamen stories and then move on. This is a whole different reading experience to read all of these different stories of like an Al Feldstein story, followed by a Kurtzman story, followed by a Wally Wood story, and see it as a complete package. Here's another Kurtzman story. See it as a complete package of what the fans were pulling off of the stands in the 50s, and seeing how great these comics were as a reading experience, reading them that way. Yeah, this is totally Kurtzman getting into his what would become his Mad Magazine style. And I just can't believe, here's another Wally Wood story. I just can't believe the idea of pulling these off the racks. These are truly some of the greatest comic books of all time, and they still hold up today. So if you're watching this video, which by all means, please subscribe if you haven't already. Give the video a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts. But if you're watching this video and you've never read EC Comics, please just go out and buy a collection of them in any format. I don't care. I know I just lambasted the recoloring on the Dark Horse collections, but if that's the easiest, most affordable way to get these comic books into your hands, then by all means. Or if you want to read them in black and white, the Fantagraphics collections, or if you want to fork down the money for this book. Again, you can get this from Organic Price Books. I believe they have it $20 off on their website. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's what it was at the start. And you can save $2 more if you use my promo code Taylor Talks Comics. All the information is down in the description below. But if you've never read EC Comics, try one out. Read it. These stories will still hold up, and they will stick with you, especially these sci-fi stories. I'm so fascinated by what these artists and sci-fi writers and things back then were predicting about technology and predicting about world events happening later in the future, and then to see and kind of compare and contrast what came to fruition, what didn't. It's just so fascinating. And that's some things that never change. Some of the discourse about certain things that haven't changed. Here's another Kurtzman story. Again, it's with these interesting layouts that he would use. And just like the cartoony images of his figures, always moving, always lively. Kurtzman is just amazing. Here's a Wood story. Signing his name Woody. Now, Fantagraphics has done one collection of Wallace Wood sci-fi stories. They're doing another one that's coming out later this year, which I'm excited for. But reading them in color is really, really great. And I should note, too, Marie Severin. So, Harvey Kurtzman was good friends with John Severin. They went to high school together, I believe. Harvey Kurtzman actually went to high school with a lot of different people that became EC Comics. It's really fascinating. But John Severin is one of them. And when he brought John Severin in to do the war comics, they brought in Marie Severin, his sister, to do coloring. And Marie Severin would then go on to do most of the coloring for all of EC's catalogs from then on. She would start off with doing this Wally. Look at that. That's like, if you're a fan of like Jack Kirby tech, like that, Wally Wood had all the noodling and stuff in there that Jack Kirby would bring to his comics. And they would go on to work together a few times throughout their careers. Sky Masters of the Space Force being the most prominent. Oh, but Marie Severin. So she would go on to do most of the coloring, but the coloring wasn't really credited in a lot of comics back then. Like I talked about with the crediting of the artist and writer was pretty wasn't very common back then anyways. Then to bring into coloring, that wasn't even thought about. But so I don't know which of these she colored and which one she didn't. If she only did like the later issues or what have you. Or if she did any of these. I don't know if maybe Marie Severin didn't come onto the picture until later. But the coloring on this is just really, really brilliant. I love the kind of the CMKY process they used with the more flat colors. I feel like it is more endearing onto this line art of the great EC artists, the best. All right, so I think I've waxed poetic about how great these comics are. Let me flip to the back here, show you what the back matter looks like. All right, so this is the cover of the back cover of the last issue. Then we get to the history. And now, again, just like the Marvel ones, but maybe a little bit more important for these because this is storyline and credits. So they go through each issue and show and tell you the credits that they know of, like the date the comic came out, how much it cost, how many pages it is, the editor, cover art, blah blah blah. And then they get to each story and they break it down by writer, artist, if they what they know of, and then a little snippet about each story. So like I said, they did the same thing with Marvel Comics, those collections, but I feel like there's more to write about here because there's so many more different stories. Like the Marvel Comics, there's just like one story per issue. There's like all these different artists and stuff to write about. So this is really, really fascinating. I was able to learn a lot from this. Here's part of the EC fandom that we see, or the fanzines that came out about after this. Here's another blown up image we get, and then original art page, and then here's the biographies of all the creatives that are involved throughout here. Which I think... Oh, Ben Oda was the great letterer that Harvey Kurtzman had on his stories. Okay, so Marie Severin is in here. So she I don't know. You can read that. She is the colorist on some of these stories, at least, if not all of them. And then here's some acknowledgments and things, the indicia that you get, and then the end papers for the backside. And that's it. Thank you for joining me for this long to wax poetic about this. I freaking love EC Comics, and I love talking about these so much. Go out and buy this book. It's like 400 plus pages of some of the best comics you'll ever read in the best format you'll ever read them in. It's truly worth the price tag. All the love and care that Taschen puts into these books is so worth it. You can shop for them on organicpricebooks.com and use my promo code TaylorTalksComics to save $2 off your order. Give the video a thumbs up, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, all that jazz. Thank you guys so much. Keep talking comics.